The desert sun hung merciless in the cloudless sky, its heat shimmering off the red rocks like the breath of some ancient demon. Sheriff Marcus Holloway pulled his hat lower over his weathered face and squinted against the glare as he guided his mare through the narrow canyon. The horse's hooves echoed off the sandstone walls, the only sound in the vast emptiness save for the whisper of wind through the scrub brush. He'd been tracking the Cassidy gang for 3 days now, following their trail of broken branches and horse droppings deeper into the Badlands. Word had reached Bitter Creek that they'd hit another bank, this time in Silver Falls, making off with enough gold to set a man up for life. The townsfolk were getting restless, demanding justice, and Holloway knew his badge wouldn't mean much if he came back empty-handed again. The trail curved around a massive boulder, and that's when he saw her. She lay crumpled against the base of a dead cottonwood, her calico dress torn and sun-bleached, dark hair spread across the sand like spilled ink. At first glance, Holloway thought he was looking at a corpse, another victim of the unforgiving wilderness that claimed travelers foolish enough to venture out unprepared. But as he dismounted and approached, he caught the faint rise and fall of her chest. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, kneeling beside her. The woman was young, maybe 25, with olive skin burned red by exposure. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, and when he lifted her head, her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Holloway uncapped his canteen and drizzled water over her parched lips. She stirred, her tongue darting out to catch the precious drops. He tried again, and this time her eyes opened, dark brown, almost black, filled with pain and something else, fear. She tried to speak, but only a rasp emerged. Holloway held the canteen to her lips, letting her drink slowly. "Easy now, miss. Don't try to talk just yet. You're safe." But she gripped his wrist with surprising strength, her fingers digging into his sun-darkened skin. Her mouth moved again, and this time sound came out, barely a whisper, but clear enough. Perdition. The word hit Holloway like a physical blow. He sat back on his heels, studying her face with new intensity. Perdition wasn't just any word. It was the name of a ghost town, abandoned for near on 15 years after the silver played out. More importantly, it was where his brother Daniel had disappeared 6 months ago while tracking a different gang of outlaws. "What about Perdition?" Holloway asked, his voice tight. "What do you know about it?" The woman's eyes rolled back, and for a moment he thought she'd lost consciousness again. But then she focused on him with effort that was painful to watch. They took him there. The man with the scar. Holloway's blood turned to ice water. Daniel had been tracking a scarred man, Jack Torino, a killer who'd left a trail of bodies from El Paso to Denver. The official story was that Daniel had gotten too close to his quarry and paid the price. His body lost somewhere in the vast desert. But this woman... "Miss, I need you to listen to me," Holloway said, lifting her gently and propping her against the tree trunk. "The man with the scar, did you see him? Are you talking about Jack Torino?" She nodded weakly, then whispered, Not dead. Your brother, still alive." The word struck Holloway like lightning. He'd mourned Daniel, had even held a funeral service in Bitter Creek's little church. But this woman, this stranger found dying in the desert, was telling him that everything he believed was a lie. "How do you know about my brother?" he demanded, though he kept his voice gentle. "Who are you?" Elena Vasquez," she managed, was traveling with a wagon train. They attacked us 3 days out of Santa Fe, took some of the women, left the rest of us to die." Holloway knew about the wagon train. Word had reached Bitter Creek 2 weeks ago about the massacre. 23 people dead, several women missing, presumed taken by Apache raiders. But if this Elena was telling the truth, it hadn't been Apache at all. The scarred man was with them? He asked. Leading them, she whispered. But they weren't bandits. Not exactly. They were collecting people, taking them to perdition. For what purpose? Elena's eyes grew distant, haunted. I don't know, but I heard them talking. They have maybe 20 prisoners there. Men, women. Your brother, he was trying to organize them, trying to plan an escape. Holloway felt his world tilting on its axis. If Daniel was alive, if he was being held prisoner in perdition, then every day that passed was another day his brother suffered. But it made no sense. Why would outlaws take prisoners instead of killing them outright? What use were captives to men who lived by the gun? How did you escape? He asked. They brought me along as a gift for someone in perdition. But the wagon broke an axle 2 days ago, and in the confusion, she touched a bloody gash on her temple. I ran, been walking ever since, trying to reach civilization. Holloway studied her face, looking for signs of deception. But all he saw was exhaustion, pain, and a desperate honesty that convinced him she was telling the truth, or at least the truth as she understood it. He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. Miss Vasquez, I need to get you to a doctor. Can you ride? No, she said, gripping his arm again. No time. They're planning something. The scarred man, he was talking about moving the prisoners soon. If you don't go now, I can't leave you here to die. You can't save your brother if you're playing nursemaid to me, she shot back, showing a spark of the fire that had probably kept her alive in the desert. Give me your water and your spare blanket. I'll make my way to the main trail, flag down the next rider heading east.
Holloway wanted to argue, but he could see the steel in her eyes. This wasn't a woman who gave up easily. Still, the thought of leaving her alone in the Badlands went against everything his father had taught him about treating folks with decency. There's a line shack about 2 miles east of here, he said finally. Old Tom Brennan uses it during roundup. Should have water and supplies. Think you can make it that far? Elena nodded, though he could see it cost her. Just promise me you'll stop them. What they're doing in perdition, it's worse than killing. They're breaking people, turning them into something less than human. Those words stayed with Holloway as he helped her onto his horse and led her toward the line shack. The building was small but solid, built to shelter cowboys during the worst weather. Inside, they found jerky, hardtack, and, most importantly, a full water barrel. "You sure about this?" Holloway asked as he settled her on the narrow bunk. "I could take you back to Bitter Creek, get Doc Martinez to look at you proper." "Your brother doesn't have that kind of time," Elena said simply, "and neither do the others." Holloway left her with most of his supplies and detailed directions to reach the main trail. As he mounted up and prepared to ride toward perdition, she called out to him one final time. "Sheriff, the scarred man, he's not the one in charge. There's someone else, someone they all fear. Be careful." The warning followed Holloway as he spurred his horse westward toward the ghost town and whatever horrors awaited him there. Behind him, the sun was already beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Time was running out, and somewhere in the abandoned silver mines of perdition, his brother Daniel was waiting for a rescue that might come too late. The thought drove Holloway harder than any spur could, sending him racing across the wasteland toward a confrontation that would test everything he believed about justice, family, and the price of survival in an unforgiving land. Perdition squatted in the valley like a cancer on the landscape, its weathered buildings and empty windows giving it the look of a skull picked clean by buzzards. Holloway approached from the north ridge just as the sun disappeared behind the western mountains, casting the ghost town in deep purple shadow. He'd left his horse tied to a stunted pine a half-mile back and covered the rest of the distance on foot, using the gathering darkness as cover. The town was bigger than he'd expected, maybe 50 buildings scattered along what had once been a main street, with the skeletal remains of a mine tipple rising against the starlit sky. Most of the structures looked abandoned, their roofs collapsed or walls caved in by 15 years of weather and neglect. But as Holloway settled behind a fallen beam and spotted signs of recent habitation, smoke drifted from the chimney of what had probably been the saloon, and lamplight flickered in several windows along the main drag. More tellingly, he could make out at least 6 horses tied outside the largest intact building, a 2-story structure that might have been a hotel in better days. Movement caught his eye near the old mine entrance. 2 men emerged from the darkness, carrying rifles and moving with the lazy confidence of guards who didn't expect trouble. They made a circuit of the visible buildings before disappearing into the hotel, confirming Holloway's suspicion that most of the activity was centered there. He waited another hour, watching and counting. By his estimation, there were at least 8 men in town, all armed and alert. The prisoners Elena had mentioned were nowhere to be seen, which meant they were either being held somewhere underground or in one of the more intact buildings where guards could watch them easily. When the moon rose full and bright, Holloway began his descent into perdition. He moved like a ghost himself, using every scrap of cover as he worked his way through the abandoned buildings. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the whisper of wind through broken windows and the distant sound of men's voices from the hotel. As he drew closer, he could make out individual words. "Should have been back by now," someone was saying. "Torino don't like to be kept waiting." "Maybe they had trouble with the woman," another voice replied. "She looked like a fighter." Holloway's jaw clenched. They were talking about Elena, which meant her escape had already been discovered. That changed things. If they sent riders to look for her, they might stumble across his trail as well. He crept around to the back of the hotel, looking for another way in. The rear wall had partially collapsed, creating a gap just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Holloway checked his weapons, 2 Colt .45s and a knife, then slipped inside. The interior was a maze of fallen beams and debris, but he could see light filtering down from the floor above. Voices carried more clearly now, and what he heard made his blood boil. "The preacher's daughter is getting too skinny," a gravelly voice complained. "Won't be worth much if she wastes away to nothing." "Feed her more then," came the reply. "Boss wants all the women kept healthy until we move them to the buyers in Juarez." Buyers. The word hit Holloway like a physical blow. They weren't just holding prisoners, they were trafficking them, selling human beings like cattle. His hand drifted to his gun, but he forced himself to stay calm. He needed more information before he acted. A staircase led to the 2nd floor, but the steps looked rotten and likely to creak. Instead, Holloway found a pile of debris that let him climb close to a hole in the ceiling. Through it, he could see into what had once been the hotel's main room. 5 men sat around a table, playing cards, their weapons within easy reach.
But it was the 6th man who made Holloway's breath catch in his throat. Jack Torino sat with his back to the wall, the infamous scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw clearly visible in the lamplight. The killer looked older than Holloway remembered from the wanted posters, his dark hair now streaked with gray. But there was no mistaking that face. "When's the boss coming back?" one of the card players asked. Torino didn't look up from his cards. "When the job's done. Could be tonight, could be next week. Our job is to keep the merchandise quiet and healthy until then." "What about the deputy that came sniffing around 6 months back? You sure he ain't gonna cause trouble?" The scarred man smiled, and it was the coldest expression Holloway had ever seen. "Daniel Holloway ain't causing nobody trouble. Man gets too curious about other folks' business. Sometimes he ends up permanently indisposed to interfere." The casual way Torino spoke about his brother's fate made Holloway see red. His hand closed around his gun butt, and for a moment he was ready to climb through that hole and start shooting. But Elena's words echoed in his memory. There's someone else, someone they all fear. Torino wasn't the top man, which meant killing him might not end this nightmare. A door opened at the far end of the room, and another man entered, young, nervous-looking, with the soft features of someone who'd never done a day of honest work in his life. "Torino," the newcomer said, "we got problems. That Mexican woman we was bringing for the boss, she's gone. Tommy and Jake found where the wagon broke down, but there ain't no sign of her." Torino's expression didn't change, but Holloway could see the tension in his shoulders. "How long ago?" "Maybe 2 days, from the look of things. She could be anywhere by now." "Or dead," one of the card players suggested, hopefully. "Desert's got a way of cleaning up loose ends." "Can't count on that," Torino said, finally looking up from his cards. Boss specifically wanted that particular woman. Said she had information he needed. If she made it to civilization, if she talked to someone. The scarred man stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Rodriguez, take 3 men and start searching. Circle out from where you found the wagon. Check every water hole and shelter between here and the main trail. If she's alive, bring her back. If she's dead, bring me proof." "What about the other prisoners?" Rodriguez asked. "Maybe we should move them now, just in case." "Not without the boss's say-so," Torino replied sharply. "That man's got plans for this operation, and he don't like folks making decisions above their station. We stick to the original timetable." As Rodriguez headed for the door, Torino called after him. "And Rodriguez, if that woman did talk to someone, if there's law coming our way, I want to know about it before they get within 10 miles of this place." "Understood?" The younger man nodded and disappeared, leaving Holloway to digest what he'd learned. There was a mysterious boss who seemed to be running the entire operation, someone important enough that even Jack Torino deferred to his authority. The prisoners were being held somewhere in town, probably the mine, based on the guards he'd seen. And, most importantly, Daniel might still be alive, despite Torino's cryptic comments. Holloway waited until the card game resumed, then carefully made his way back down through the debris. He needed to find where the prisoners were being held and confirm whether his brother was among them. But as he reached the ground floor, he heard the sound of hoofbeats, Rodriguez and his search party heading out to look for Elena. That gave him maybe 12 hours before they found the line shack and realized someone had helped the escaped woman. 12 hours to rescue 20 prisoners, deal with at least 4 remaining guards, and get everyone clear of perdition before reinforcements arrived. The mine entrance loomed against the starlit sky as Holloway made his way across town, using the shadows cast by ruined buildings to stay hidden. 2 guards stood outside the main shaft, rifles across their shoulders, but they were talking quietly and paying more attention to their conversation than their surroundings. "Was told you she was trouble the minute they brought her in," one was saying. "Had that look in her eyes, like a wild Mustang that ain't never been properly broken." "Boss'll break her spirit once he gets back," the other replied. "He's got a particular talent for that sort of thing." Holloway circled wide around the mine entrance, looking for another way in. The old silver workings honeycombed the hillside, and he remembered hearing that most of the shafts connect underground. If he could find a back entrance, maybe he could reach the prisoners without alerting the guards. It took him 20 minutes of careful searching, but he finally found what he was looking for. A partially collapsed side tunnel that looked like it had been blocked off when the mine was abandoned. The rocks had shifted over the years, creating a gap just big enough for a determined man to squeeze through. Holloway lit a match to check the stability of the passage, then crawled into the darkness. The tunnel sloped downward for maybe 50 feet before opening into a larger chamber. He could hear voices ahead, echoing off stone walls, and see the faint glow of lamplight. As he crept forward, the voices became clearer, and one of them made his heart nearly stop. "Told you we should have tried to rush them when Rodriguez left," a familiar voice was saying. 4 guards are better odds than 8. And get everyone killed in the process? A woman replied sharply. Some of these people can barely walk, let alone fight. Holloway rounded a corner and found himself looking into a natural cavern that had been expanded by the miners. Oil lamps hung from iron spikes driven into the rock walls, casting dancing shadows over a scene that made his blood boil. 23 people were crowded into the space, men, women, and children ranging in age from maybe 10 to 60. They were chained together in groups of 3 or 4, the iron shackles connected by lengths of heavy chain that allowed them to move around the cavern but prevented any real freedom of movement. Most showed signs of abuse, bruises, cuts, the hollow-eyed look of people who'd been pushed beyond their limits. But it was the man speaking who held Holloway's attention. Daniel Holloway sat with his back against the cavern wall, his left arm hanging at an odd angle that suggested a badly healed break. His face was thinner than Marcus remembered, marked by months of captivity, but his eyes still held the fire that had made him a good lawman. "Daniel," Marcus whispered, stepping into the lamplight. His brother's head snapped up, and for a moment neither man could speak. Then Daniel's face broke into a grin despite their desperate circumstances. "Marcus, what in the hell are you doing here?" "Coming to get you out," Marcus replied, already studying the chains and locks. "All of you." A woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes looked up from where she sat cradled against Daniel's good side. "Sheriff, I'm Doc Sarah Mitchell from Silver Falls. These chains are solid iron, and the locks are new. You got keys or a file?" Marcus shook his head, then heard footsteps in the tunnel behind him. Heavy boots, moving fast. He spun around just as one of the guards appeared at the cavern entrance, rifle raised and pointed directly at his chest. "Well, well," the man drawled, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Looks like we got ourselves a family reunion." The guard kept his rifle trained on Holloway while calling over his shoulder. "Hey, Torino, you better get down here. We got ourselves a visitor, and I think you're gonna want to see this." Holloway's hand itched for his gun, but with 23 innocent lives in the line of fire, he couldn't risk it. Daniel started to rise, his shackles clanking against the stone floor, but Marcus caught his eye and shook his head slightly. Not yet. Heavy footsteps echoed down the main tunnel, and Jack Torino appeared with 2 more men behind him. The scarred killer looked Holloway up and down with cold amusement, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "Marcus Holloway," Torino said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd been expecting this moment. "Wondered how long it would take you to come looking for your brother." "Jack," Holloway replied evenly, keeping his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. "You're looking well for a dead man." Torino laughed, the sound harsh and without humor. "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated, though I can't say the same for some folks who've come looking for me. Like my brother? Your brother's been real helpful, actually."
Amazing how cooperative a man gets when you demonstrate the proper motivation. Torino gestured to Daniel's broken arm. Course, some folks need more convincing than others. Daniel met Marcus's eyes, and in that look passed a lifetime of brotherhood, of shared memories and unspoken understanding. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. "What's this all about, Torino?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious despite their circumstances. "This isn't your usual style. Since when do you traffic in human beings?" The scarred man's expression grew serious. "Since I started working for someone who appreciates the long-term profit potential. You know what a healthy young woman sells for in Mexico? What about a skilled doctor or a preacher's daughter with some education? We're talking about real money here, Sheriff, more than you could steal from a dozen banks." "And the boss gets a cut of everything?" "The boss gets everything," Torino corrected. "This whole operation is his idea. I'm just the hired help."
Marcus filed that information away. Whoever was running this operation had enough pull to organize something this elaborate, enough money to buy Jack Torino's loyalty, and enough connections to have buyers lined up for human cargo. That narrowed the possibilities considerably. "Well," Marcus said, raising his hand slowly, "looks like you got me. Guess I should have listened when folks said my brother was dead." Torino relaxed slightly, which was exactly what Marcus had been hoping for. "Yeah, you should have. But don't worry, the boss'll be back soon, and he likes to handle family reunions personal. You'll get to see Daniel one more time before we ship you both south of the border." That's when Marcus made his move. He dove left, pulling both Colts as he rolled behind a pile of mining equipment. The guards opened fire, their bullets sparking off iron and stone, but Marcus was already moving. He put 2 quick shots into the nearest guard, dropping him instantly, then rolled again as rifle fire chewed up the ground where he'd been lying. "Take him alive!" Torino shouted over the gunfire. "Boss wants to deal with him personal." That order saved Marcus's life. Instead of concentrating their fire, the remaining guards tried to wound rather than kill, giving him the precious seconds he needed to find better cover. But the prisoners were trapped in the open, and he could see some of them had been hit by flying rock chips. Daniel, despite his broken arm and the chains, had managed to grab a chunk of loose stone and was working his way toward the nearest guard. Dr. Mitchell was trying to keep the other prisoners low and out of a line of fire, but they were sitting ducks as long as the shooting continued. Marcus broke from cover, firing rapidly to drive the guards back, then sprinted for the tunnel entrance. If he could draw them out of the cavern, get them away from the prisoners, he might have a chance. "Come on!" he shouted, disappearing into the darkness. "Come and get me!" The guards took the bait, following him into the narrow tunnels where their numerical advantage was negated. But Torino was too smart to be drawn into a trap so easily. "Williams, stay with the prisoners," the scarred man ordered. "If any of them try anything, shoot the woman doctor first." That changed everything. Marcus couldn't leave the prisoners unguarded, couldn't risk Dr. Mitchell's life on the hope that he could outfight Torino and his remaining men in the tunnels. He'd have to make his stand here and now. He emerged from the tunnel with both guns blazing, walking forward into the storm of lead like an avenging angel. The first guard went down with a bullet between the eyes. The second tried to duck behind a mining cart but caught Marcus's next shot in the chest, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the cavern wall. That left Torino and Williams, both professional killers who wouldn't be taken by surprise twice. Williams had his rifle trained on Dr. Mitchell's head, while Torino circled to Marcus's left, looking for an angle. "Drop the guns, Sheriff," Torino called out. "You're good, but you ain't good enough to take both of us before Williams puts a bullet in the dock." Marcus stopped, his Colt still leveled, but his finger off the triggers. 23 lives hung in the balance, and one wrong move would turn the cavern into a slaughterhouse. "Smart man," Torino said, though he kept his own weapon raised. "Now, real slow, set them guns on the ground and step back." That's when Daniel made his move. Despite the chains and his broken arm, he launched himself at Williams from behind, wrapping the chain around the man's throat and hauling him backward. Williams' shot went wild, the bullet whining off the ceiling, and his rifle clattered to the stone floor. Marcus didn't hesitate. He put 2 bullets into Torino's chest before the scarred man could swing his gun around, watching the killer's eyes go wide with surprise before he crumpled to the cavern floor. Williams was still struggling with Daniel, trying to break free of the chain around his throat when Marcus reached them. A single shot to the head ended the fight permanently. The cavern fell silent, except for the moans of the wounded and the heavy breathing of people who just stared death in the face. Marcus holstered his guns and knelt beside his brother, checking him for new injuries. "You hurt?" Daniel grinned weakly, his face pale with exhaustion. "Nothing that won't heal. But Marcus, we got bigger problems. The boss Torino was talking about. He's supposed to be back tonight, and he ain't coming alone." Dr. Mitchell had already begun tending to the wounded, her medical bag apparently among the few possessions the captors had allowed the prisoners to keep. "Sheriff," she said, without looking up from a young woman's bleeding scalp, "some of these people can't travel far."
That little girl there has been sick for days, and the older man by the wall has a broken leg that never set right. Marcus surveyed the prisoners, taking quick inventory of their condition. Maybe half were healthy enough to ride hard if they had to. The rest would slow them down, make them easy targets for pursuit. "How many men does this boss typically travel with?" he asked Daniel. "Last time I saw him, he had 6 riders, professional gun hands, not like these amateurs." Daniel struggled to his feet, the chains making every movement awkward. "Marcus, there's something else. I know who the boss is." "Who?" "Judge Cornelius Blackwood." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Judge Blackwood was one of the most powerful men in the territory, with connections that reached all the way to Washington. He owned half the copper mines in Arizona and had his fingers in everything from railroad contracts to Indian affairs. If Blackwood was behind this operation— "You sure?" Marcus asked. "Saw him twice while I was here. Watched him personally select which prisoners would go where, like he was shopping for cattle. Man's got a taste for young women and educated folk. Says they bring premium prices from his buyers in Mexico." The sound of hoofbeats echoed down from the surface, growing louder by the second. Marcus counted at least 6 horses, maybe more. "That'll be the boss now," Daniel said grimly. Marcus looked around the cavern, taking stock of their situation. 23 prisoners, most of them weak from captivity. Limited weapons and ammunition. No easy way out except through the main tunnel, where Blackwood and his men would be waiting. But Marcus Holloway hadn't worn a badge for 15 years by backing down from long odds. "Doc," he called to Dr. Mitchell, "get everyone who can't fight moved to the back of the cavern. Daniel, can you handle a gun with that arm?" His brother picked up William's rifle, left-handed, working the action with practiced ease. Good enough. The hoofbeats stopped directly above them, and Marcus could hear voices, cultured, educated tones that matched what he knew of Judge Blackwood's reputation. "Torino," the voice called down into the mine. "Report." Marcus and Daniel exchanged glances. If they could make Blackwood think everything was normal, maybe draw him and his men down into the tunnels. "Torinos," Marcus called back, pitching his voice to Carrie. "Had to deal with some trouble with the prisoners." A long pause. Then, "Who is this?" "Name's Holloway. Your boy Torino hired me to help with security." Another pause, longer this time. Then the unmistakable sound of men moving into position around the mine entrance. "Mr. Holloway," Blackwood's voice carried a note of cold amusement, "I'm afraid Jack Torino is no longer in a position to hire anyone, and I have a feeling you're not exactly who you claim to be." So much for the deception. Marcus checked his weapons, counting ammunition. He had maybe 20 rounds left between his 2 Colts, plus whatever was in the rifle Daniel had picked up. "Judge Blackwood," he called back, abandoning any pretense. "This is Sheriff Marcus Holloway. You're under arrest for kidnapping, human trafficking, and the murder of my deputy." Laughter echoed down from above, rich and genuinely amused. "Sheriff, I do admire your dedication to duty, but you seem to be at something of a disadvantage. You're trapped in a hole in the ground with a collection of merchandise that belongs to me, and I have 6 armed men positioned around the only exit." "Then I guess we have ourselves what you might call a Mexican standoff," Marcus replied. "Not exactly," Blackwood said. "You see, I have something you want, the freedom of those innocent people, and you have something I want, my property. I'm prepared to make you a deal. I'm listening."
Surrender yourself and your brother, and I'll let the others go free. Continue this pointless resistance, and I'll have my men drop dynamite down that shaft. The mine will become their tomb, and you'll be responsible for their deaths." Marcus felt the weight of 23 lives pressing down on him. These people had already suffered enough, had already lost everything. Did he have the right to gamble with their lives? But Daniel's voice cut through his doubts. "Don't listen to him, Marcus. Man who trades in human beings ain't got honor enough to keep his word. He'll kill us all either way." Dr. Mitchell looked up from her patients. "The sheriff's right. I've treated some of Blackwood's previous merchandise in Silver Falls. The ones who survived their journey south came back broken, if they came back at all." That decided it. Marcus moved to the tunnel entrance, pressing himself against the wall where he had a clear view up toward the surface. "Here's my counteroffer, Judge," he called. "You and your men ride away now, and I won't put bullets in you. Stay, and I can't make any promises about your continued health." "You disappoint me, Sheriff. I had hoped you might be more reasonable." The first stick of dynamite came bouncing down the main tunnel, its fuse sparking in the darkness. Marcus shot it in midair, the explosion shaking dust from the ceiling but doing no real damage. The second stick followed immediately after, but Daniel was ready with the rifle, detonating it while it was still 20 feet from the cavern entrance. "They're trying to collapse the tunnel," Dr. Mitchell shouted over the ringing in their ears. Marcus could see the logic. If Blackwood could bring down enough rock to seal the main entrance, the prisoners would slowly suffocate or die of thirst. The judge could wait them out, then dig up the merchandise at his leisure. But the old silver mine had been built to last. The main tunnel was reinforced with heavy timbers, and it would take more than a few sticks of dynamite to bring it down completely.
More importantly, Marcus remembered something from his childhood visits to abandoned mines with his father. "Daniel," he said, "you remember the old Henderson mine outside Bitter Creek? The one with the connecting tunnel to the smelter?" His brother's eyes lit up with understanding. "Most of these old mines have secondary shafts, air vents, emergency exits. Doc, get everyone ready to move. We're getting out of here." It took Marcus 10 precious minutes to find what he was looking for, a narrow shaft that angled upward toward the surface, probably an old air vent that had been carved when the mine was active. It was barely wide enough for a single person, and the climb would be treacherous in the darkness, but it was their only chance. More dynamite exploded in the main tunnel, and this time Marcus could hear the rumble of falling rock. Blackwood was getting impatient, increasing the frequency of his attacks. "This passage comes out somewhere up on the hillside," Marcus explained to the group. "It's a hard climb, especially for anyone who's injured, but it's the only way out." Dr. Mitchell had organized the prisoners into small groups based on their ability to travel. The healthiest would go first, blazing a trail and helping from above. The injured would follow, assisted by the stronger members of the group. "What about you?" Daniel asked. "Someone needs to keep Blackwood's men busy down here, make them think we're still trapped, buy time for everyone to get clear." "Then I'm staying too." Marcus shook his head. "You can barely hold that rifle with one arm. These folks need you to help guide them out." For a moment it looked like Daniel might argue, but then he nodded. Brothers understood each other, especially when the stakes were this high. The evacuation began with painful slowness. The air shaft was even narrower than Marcus had hoped, and several of the larger men had to be helped through the tightest sections. Dr. Mitchell stayed behind with the most seriously injured, refusing to leave until everyone else was safe. More explosions rocked the main tunnel, each one bringing more debris cascading down. Marcus kept up a steady stream of rifle fire toward the entrance, making it sound like multiple defenders were still fighting back. But his ammunition was running low, and sooner or later, Blackwood would realize what was happening. The moment came sooner than expected. One of Blackwood's men appeared at the tunnel entrance, using a mirror to peek around the corner without exposing himself to Marcus's fire. "Judge," the man called back toward the surface, "they ain't shooting back no more. I think we got 'em all." Marcus cursed under his breath. Only half the prisoners had made it into the air shaft, with Dr. Mitchell and the most injured still waiting their turn. He fired a quick burst to convince the scout he was wrong, but he was down to his last few rounds. "Keep moving," he whispered urgently to the doctor. "Get them up that shaft now." But it was too late.
Heavy footsteps echoed down the main tunnel as Blackwood's men advanced, emboldened by the sudden quiet. Marcus could see the glow of their torches getting brighter, hear their confident voices as they moved through the debris of their dynamite attack. "Sheriff Holloway," Judge Blackwood's cultured voice preceded him down the tunnel. "I do hope you've reconsidered my generous offer." Marcus pressed himself against the cavern wall, his last loaded Colt in his right hand, Daniel's rifle in his left. Behind him, he could hear Dr. Mitchell helping an elderly man into the air shaft, the sound of their movement covered by the echo of approaching boots. 3 men emerged from the tunnel mouth, torches held high, weapons ready. Blackwood followed a moment later, his expensive suit somehow still immaculate despite the underground pursuit. He was younger than Marcus had expected, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of pale, soft features that came from a life spent in offices rather than under the desert sun. "Ah, Sheriff," the judge said, surveying the bodies of his fallen men with mild disappointment. "You've been quite troublesome. Jack Torino came highly recommended, but it seems his reputation was somewhat overstated." "Man was fast with a gun," Marcus replied, keeping his weapons trained on the group. "But he had a weakness for talking too much." Blackwood smiled, the expression cold as winter wind. "Yes, Jack did enjoy his work a bit too much. Unprofessional, really. I prefer a more businesslike approach to these matters." The judge's eyes swept the cavern, taking in the empty shackles and scattered chains. His smile faded as he realized what he was seeing. "Where are my prisoners, Sheriff?" "Gone," Marcus said simply, "free as birds and heading for civilization. By tomorrow morning, every lawman in the territory will know about your little operation here." For the first time, Blackwood's composed mask slipped, revealing the cold fury. "Impossible. There's only one way out of this mine, and we've been watching it. You'd be surprised what desperate people can accomplish when they put their minds to it." One of Blackwood's men whispered something in the judge's ear, pointing toward the rear of the cavern where the air shaft opened. Blackwood's face went white with rage as he understood the scope of his loss. "Kill him," he ordered quietly. Marcus moved as the men raised their weapons, diving behind the mining equipment as bullets sparked off iron and stone. But he was outnumbered 4 to 1, with limited ammunition and no chance of reinforcement. It was only a matter of time before they flanked him or simply overwhelmed his position. That's when salvation arrived from an unexpected direction. Daniel's voice echoed from the air shaft behind Blackwood's men, magnified by the stone walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Judge, you're surrounded. Drop your weapons and surrender, or we'll drop you where you stand." The bluff might not have worked against seasoned gunfighters, but Blackwood's men were hired muscle, not professional outlaws. The disembodied voice coming from the darkness above spooked them, made them look over their shoulders and question what they couldn't see. Marcus took advantage of their momentary confusion, rising from cover to put bullets into 2 of the men before they could react. The third tried to run for the tunnel entrance, but caught Daniel's rifle shot in the back, tumbling face first into the rubble. That left only Judge Blackwood, standing alone in the torchlight with his hands raised and his expensive pistol lying on the cavern floor where he'd dropped it. "Congratulations, Sheriff," he said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "You've won this particular engagement, but I think you'll find that arresting me creates more problems than it solves." "How's that?" Marcus asked, keeping his gun trained on the judge while he retrieved the man's weapon. "I'm a federal judge, appointed by the president himself. I have friends in Washington, business interests that span 3 territories. You're a small-town sheriff with no jurisdiction here and no proof of any wrongdoing beyond the word of a few Mexican peasants and escaped slaves." Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Blackwood was right about the jurisdictional issues, and a man with his connections could probably make any charges disappear into a maze of legal technicalities. "Besides," the judge continued, "what exactly are you going to charge me with? I was never officially here. My men were acting on their own, pursuing some private business venture. Tragic that they chose to involve kidnapping and human trafficking, but hardly my responsibility." "You're forgetting something," Marcus said. "You've got a witness who can place you here personally. My brother saw you selecting prisoners, heard you giving orders." Blackwood laughed, the sound echoing off the cavern walls. "Your brother, the deputy who was officially killed in the line of duty 6 months ago? I'm afraid dead men don't make very credible witnesses, Sheriff. And if Daniel were to suddenly reappear, well, there might be questions about how he survived his supposed death. Questions that could prove embarrassing for both of you." The threat was clear. If Daniel testified against Blackwood, the judge would make sure the deputy was charged with deserting his post, abandoning his duties, maybe even collaborating with the criminals who'd supposedly killed him. But before Marcus could respond, Dr. Mitchell's voice came from the airshaft above. "Sheriff, the prisoners are all clear, and we found something you need to see."
A rope dropped down from the opening, and moments later the doctor descended, carrying a leather satchel that looked like it had seen better days. Behind her came Daniel, moving awkwardly with his broken arm, but grinning with satisfaction. "Found this in what used to be the judge's private office up in the old mine superintendent's building," Daniel explained. "Seems His Honor kept detailed records of his business transactions." Dr. Mitchell opened the satchel, revealing neat stacks of papers covered in Blackwood's precise handwriting. Shipping manifests, buyer contracts, payment records, everything documenting his operation going back 2 years. Names, dates, prices paid for specific individuals. Marcus saw Blackwood's face go ashen as the full scope of his exposure became clear. This wasn't just the word of escaped prisoners against a respected judge. This was a paper trail that would lead investigators straight to every aspect of the trafficking ring. "Judge Cornelius Blackwood," Marcus said formally, "you're under arrest for kidnapping, human trafficking, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise it." As he secured shackles around Blackwood's wrists, the same iron chains that had held the prisoners, Marcus felt a grim satisfaction. Justice in the territories might be rough and imperfect, but it was still justice. "This isn't over, Sheriff," Blackwood said as Marcus led him toward the tunnel. "I have resources you can't imagine, connections that reach—" "Judge," Daniel interrupted, "you might want to save your breath. It's a long walk back to Bitter Creek, and talking won't make it any shorter." The sun was rising over the desert as they emerged from Perdition's mines, painting the Badlands in shades of gold and crimson. The freed prisoners had organized themselves into traveling groups, with the healthiest helping to support those still recovering from their captivity.
Dr. Mitchell moved among them like a guardian angel, checking injuries and dispensing medicine from her seemingly inexhaustible bag. Elena Vasquez was waiting by the horses, having somehow made her way back from the line shack despite her injuries. She looked up as Marcus approached, her dark eyes bright with relief. "You found them," she said. "We found them," Marcus agreed, "all of them alive, thanks to your warning." Elena nodded toward where Judge Blackwood sat chained to a stunted tree, his expensive suit now torn and dusty. "And him? Will there be justice?" Marcus looked at the leather satchel full of incriminating documents, then at his brother Daniel standing tall despite his injuries, then at the 23 people who would return to their families because they'd refused to give up hope. "Yes," he said with certainty, "there'll be justice." The ride back to Bitter Creek took 3 days, but it felt like a victory parade. Word of the rescue spread ahead of them, carried by grateful relatives and friends of the freed prisoners. By the time they reached town, half the territory seemed to be waiting to welcome them home. Judge Blackwood was transferred to the territorial capital under heavy guard, where federal marshals took custody of both him and the evidence that would ultimately send him to prison for the rest of his life. His trafficking network was dismantled completely, with buyers and suppliers arrested from Arizona to Mexico City. Daniel's arm healed crooked but strong, and he returned to his deputy duties with a new understanding of how precious freedom truly was. Dr. Mitchell established a practice in Bitter Creek, becoming the kind of doctor who made house calls at all hours and never turned away patients who couldn't pay. Elena Vasquez stayed in town just enough to testify at Blackwood's trial, then disappeared one morning with only a note of thanks left behind. Some said she'd gone back to Mexico to search for family members who might have survived other trafficking operations. Others claimed she'd headed north to California, looking for a new start in a place where the past couldn't follow. Marcus never saw her again, but sometimes on quiet desert evenings, when the sun was setting over the Badlands, he'd remember a dying woman whispering one word that changed everything. Perdition had been meant as a curse, a place where lost souls were damned forever. Instead, it had become the place where 23 people found their way back to freedom, where justice triumphed over corruption, and where 2 brothers learned that some bonds are stronger than chains, deeper than graves, and more enduring than the harsh desert itself.